Hello and welcome back. We have a positive video today. Bret Easton Ellis, one of my favourite writers, published his first novel in 13 years. And oh, it didn't disappoint. The Shards. Now, this is autofiction, so effectively autofiction is a fictionalized memoir of his final year of high school in 1981 in Los Angeles. And this was serialized through his podcast on Patreon, and I was listening to it wholeheartedly. So, where do we start with this book? First things first, writing style. Bret has this fascinating writing style that can feel very clinical, but also very impactful. He knows how to use words, he knows how to create the mood and the setting. He also writes very good dialogue, both internally and externally. He's a writer that can create something that feels very believable and very real without falling into the almost cliched writing style that can happen when people try and do this. People try to emulate him and it always fails miserably. This book has this sort of richness of characters, lots of gratuitous violence, and it definitely it keeps you there, and you kind of get pulled into the kind of emotional protagonist. There's an emotional realm and the headspace of the protagonist of this book that very rarely happens with any book in this style. I think autofiction can be a hit and miss genre, but when you do it right, my God, do you do it right. It does feel kind of squished together in places. It can be an overly detailed, heavy on the fiction memoir, and a high school gothic, as someone quoted, I think it was Publishers Weekly, serial killer thriller. This book, it both crosses that line between it profoundly meaningful and realistic to the profoundly unbelievable, and yet it still works. The story keeps you engaged. It keeps you wanting to keep reading. You never want to put this book down, and that's ultimately something that very rarely happens in fiction. I've talked about Bret Easton Ellis before on this channel, from Less Than Zero, Rules of Attraction, American Psycho, which is his most well-known book, to name but 3 of his other books, but there are a few others. He's also a great interviewer, great writer, full stop, and his podcast is actually very good. Bret was one of probably the last superstar writers, really, in adult fiction, and someone that seems very fascinating as a person. Coming into this book and reading it, I listened to the audio on his podcast and I was blown away by it. And now, as it comes into this sort of paperback form, it works just as well written. Because sometimes if things start as an audio thing, you kind of get that locked into your brain. I found this book kept me wanting to read, kept me wanting to keep going, and I read it in a weekend, which surprised me, if you want the honest truth. I come out of it and I basically consumed the whole book over 2 days and was genuinely blown away by it. And what I will say is that when I came out of the book and you hit that ending without giving any spoilers away, you kind of sit there and think, I want more of this. And I did go back and I did reread Less Than Zero and American Psycho after I finished these works. They are phenomenal books and great writing, great structure, and ultimately a book that will keep you wanting to keep in there. You never want to put this down, and sadly, to not putting it down is that I managed to damage the dust cover, which has annoyed me because it came pretty much everywhere with me. Ultimately, if you're a fan of Bret's work and autobiography, you will enjoy this, autofiction, whatever you want to call it. This kind of blurred lines between what is real, what isn't, this kind of almost cartoonish gratuitousness that just, it keeps you reading. I describe this book as bitter chocolate. It definitely has a darkness to it, but you just want more. And I cannot wait for more works from him, because hopefully it won't be 14 years between the next book, but we'll see what happens. So hopefully we will get more. If you're interested in this book, a link is available in the description, and I will talk to you guys later.